Hey, welcome back to the pod. Today I am talking to Gisell Paula. Gisell is a strategic business partner and operational BFF, and she helps small businesses leverage their feel good competitive advantage so they can scale their impact using their unique winning strategy without burning out or wasting time on tactics that don't work. That sounds familiar. That's because there's huge alignment between what she does and some of the things that we do. This is a great conversation. We talk about human-centered design, human-centered operations, and how to lead, how to grow with empathy. We have a few interesting back and forth dialogues around team building culture, what to look out for, how to empower the team, how to measure success in the team, how to implement what's working, what's not working online right now with teams as they grow. And I think you're going to enjoy this conversation with Gisell. Gisell, welcome to the pod.
Hi, Raul. Excited to be here.
Let me paint the picture to you. I was doing a client audit. It was a while ago for this one in particular, but I was doing a client audit sometime last year, and the woman or the founder, she hired an operations lead manager. I don't know what to call them, but they were like an operations manager, super sharp, super savvy, but they came in, added operations to the max, but they forgot the one key component, and that's people. And it pissed a lot of people off. Let
Mm.
me tell you, the operations manager, rubbed people the wrong way. People got upset. Change was hard. She was
Oof.
demanding, or like they were their approach was kind of like demanding and not like people centric. And that caused a lot of friction. So something that could be very beneficial and positive ROI for the business turned out to be a net negative loss in terms of expense plus the loss of personnel because of it. I think that relationships are the heart of business, that the future of business is human. And I kind of want to understand your perspective on how to marry change, streamlining businesses, creating operational excellence while still keeping the human on the forefront.
Yeah. Well, first of all, that's like my worst nightmare, what you just outlined of just like implementing operational changes and everyone is peeved. Ultimately, when it comes to like change management and operational excellence, there's really the main thing that is in mind is change is going to be painful no matter what. It could be that it makes the process easier, but just the mere fact of having to adjust your brain to like taking a new route or doing something a different way, that's going to be a level of pain for the end user, for the team. And so I always look at making sure that whatever processes are implemented, and this is really important, whenever you're implementing change, the benefits have to outweigh that pain point. And the only way to figure out whether the benefits outweigh the pain point is to take into account the way that people naturally work already and to try and kind of like corral and build some sort of structure that works within the way that people most naturally work. And
Interesting.
obviously, I'm curious, what's interesting about it?
Well, how do you dive into and analyze how people naturally work? Like how do you, because that seems like you're also taking personality tests or personality work preferences and then outlining what's the best approach operationally. It's like how do you assess that when you're coming or diving into a team to make sure that the change that is needed is executed, but in a way that's in alignment with the team?
Yeah. So, not personality tests per se, but a huge component of what should be taken into account is like the business personality test. So, what is the culture?
Hmm.
How do people already collaborate? And a lot of times, what that means is just me coming in and just observing and just seeing how people work as they are and getting a true understanding of where the pain points are. Because obviously, like businesses are functioning and they exist in the world and they're not falling apart. So that means that, like, some elements of it are working, and you don't want to squash the elements that work really well or the parts that make working at this company really fun and make it productive in other ways by introducing all of these like really like oppressive systems. So a lot of
Hmm.
it is there's no shortcut. You have to talk to folks. You have to understand how do different teams collaborate? How do different individuals collaborate? What tools do they use? Why do they use the tool? If especially what we see a lot is different people like different tools, and it's just okay, why? So a lot of it is trying to understand how do people work, and that's conversation and observation. You have to be curious and critical about the way that work is being done today to really understand what the root causes of inefficiencies are and how can you isolate to the best of your ability, kind of addressing those. And when I say isolate, that doesn't necessarily mean like I'm going to fix this one tiny issue, because
Mhm.
the purpose of doing this kind of audit in the beginning of understanding how things work is you'll find that a lot of things have cascading events. So if you fix one element of it, you might find that might change a lot of other things, and that kind of changes the landscape. And so you have to think a little strategically, and it's okay, well, this one thing hits these other two pain points, but that creates something else.
Mhm.
And so yeah, slow rollouts, definitely give people some time for equilibrium. And then when it comes to change management, a lot of support. I think just really making people feel not only empowered that they know how to use the new thing, right? Because that's always really frustrating at the end of the day. Like, your workers are trying to do work,
Oh
like
yeah,
that
trying
is
to
their goal.
execute. Let me do my
Yeah.
job, right?
Yeah. And they're like, this new thing is slowing me down. So just, I think building advocacy and that trust with people of, hey, this is going to be painful, but I'm going to be here for you. And in the same vein, I don't go and I'm just like this team or like this person, like they're not doing this thing. If it's not being implemented, I look at that as a process failure. Something has
Hmm.
happened in the communication of the new process. Something has happened in the process that's been defined where it's not, especially if it's widely not being adopted, something didn't quite fit the need of the organization.
Interesting. Going back, are you familiar with IDEO, human-centered design?
Yeah.
A lot of the vocabulary that we share and a lot of the framework that I see you explain in your language mirrors a lot of that. And instead of coming in saying, here's the solution, enforcing a solution, you're adapting an existing solution that you know is going to work to a team, which creates customization, but you're also adding a layer of empathy and patience, which I think is the hardest part. The patience part is what I'm trying to say.
To an extent. So what's really interesting is when we think about these design thinking tools, they're used all the time for external solutions, right? When we're building, especially in the world of technology, we're thinking about like building a new product or something like that. It,
Or an onboarding sequence for a customer, right? Because I know you're all about
yeah,
customer experience and client experience. So it's like the same
yeah.
thing, but for the internal team or team's experience.
Exactly. So
Hmm.
we're well versed in doing it externally. It's just that level of grace and that level of kind of care is never, not never, but it's seldom applied to internal solutions.
That's interesting. And I was on a podcast last week and we were talking about growing agencies. And one of the co-hosts or the co-hosts, she currently works for an agency, but in the past she used to work and manage probably like 20 clients at a time. And the whole idea and the culture, the feeling was that she would be a workhorse for the agency and that would not, it's
Mm.
not fun. The experience sucks. It's very stressful. And that's the culture. But it's a mirror to what you're saying that yes, if I'm running a company and for clients, I want their experience to be amazing. I want them to get results. But if you don't do the same thing for the internal of the team, because you got options, you can have someone be a workhorse and then they hate their job or they hate their like experience. Or you can also mirror the same principles that if I want my clients to have a great experience, I also want my team to have a greater or even as great an experience as the clients, because they're the ones that's actually delivering or doing the product work or do the dev work.
Absolutely. And I think as a world, I think we're getting a little bit closer to realizing that. I think we've realized it. I think we're at a place where we're aligning now understanding of just like culture and the changing workplaces and the changing expectations that younger generations have in the workplace and what it is that they expect from there.
Hmm.
And I think business owners are aligning that to business outcome expectations. And also
Hmm.
to have grace. These things are a little, they can be a little bit harder to quantify. It's very easy to see, are you making money? Are you not? Where are your profits? Are your employees happy? Are, even when it comes to like operational solutions, like does this new process, does this new tool actually help relieve pain point? It does require a little bit of abstract thinking and a little bit of finding new ways to measure success.
That's interesting you say that. One of the things that I do when we do a like a financial audit and forecasting for clients part of that at the very bottom, I create like a team health check mark.
Mm.
Obviously, you can measure revenue per employee, et cetera, et cetera. But I also put, okay, how many errors did the team commit this week or this month? And if you can start measuring errors going down, that means that there's something good in your communication, something good in your execution, or maybe it's a communication gap that you want to measure. But then on top of that, you also want to have regular, I would at least do this quarterly, but how happy is the team? And
Yeah.
using a Fibonacci scale, like what is their quality of life working with you and doing, creating some sort of feedback loop. And this is where you have to get creative with the founder, creating a feedback loop to identify, okay, what are they reporting back in terms of their experience? Not that this company has to give them purpose and fulfillment, but at least something that they look forward to. And when you do that quarterly, you start to see, okay, cool, we're getting there, they're getting aligned, or hey, we're way off the mark. Everyone's here rating us at a 1 or a 3, very low on the spectrum. We're not doing a good job taking care of our people or supporting them or empowering them. And I think that's a really good eye opener, besides just like how much revenue did we make this month, because here's the name of the game. It takes people to run a business. You don't got the people, you don't got the business. That's third grade math for everyone out there. But
Absolutely. I'm super curious. In what ways have you seen this scale amongst your clients, like the scale of team happiness? How have you seen that like leveraged?
there's a lot of dynamics when it comes to, well, so to give you a preface, teams need 3 different things. They obviously need training, the tools, and the support, but they also need the empathy, the like positive psychological workplace, not toxic environments. That's also the language that you use, the words that you use, how you use Slack or whatever communication tool. And they also need empowerment. So when you give the teams that, that's like a preface. Like those are like breathing habits, how to breathe for a company in terms of culture. To leverage that, I think it's really good at get feedback loops, because sometimes if you're up in the C-suite tower, the executive tower, like you're up there, you don't even know what's going down in the bottom trenches. It gives you a huge eye opener. Like you think things are amazing, but then you talk to people
Yeah.
like, oh wow, like they're not as empowered as I thought they were. Or I bought them this course or this program, or we shipped them to a conference and they came back, but they're not implementing it. Because I've seen that as well. Like you send people to a 1 week conference, they come back, what gets implemented? Nothing. They took notes, they loved it, but nothing gets implemented. So it's how do you leverage those experiences to actually implement real change and create an environment or foster an environment of failure is okay. Randy Hall was on the pod. I don't know how many episodes ago, maybe 50. I have no clue. But Randy talked about like change management, which is the hardest thing to do in business.
Mhm.
Actually, very few people get it done correctly. He gave like 3 steps. And part of those steps was you have to preface that when you try something new, it's okay to fail, because that shows that we tried, but it's not okay to give up. So get a feedback loop. Failure's a feedback loop. Try again, iterate, and communicate until you get things to start working and fine tuning. So when it comes to how to implement or leverage that, I think it's dependent on your goals, the strategy, the business, the industry, the culture. So those are just some of the things that I've seen personally.
No, for sure. The reason I asked is depending on the culture that already exists, right? Having those measurements, they can be scary for employees. And it's important to acknowledge that. I
Hmm.
remember I was implementing a scaled agile program. So there was a federal org that was going from waterfall to a more traditional way, and they wanted to implement scale agile. And one of the very common things that are used in the commercial world is velocity and being able to count
Mhm.
how many, basically, if you're not familiar with the space, it's like your work gets, engineers will measure their work, the level of effort based by points. And then each team will have how many points they went through in like a certain window called a sprint. And I know that for a lot of teams, that can be really scary because now this measurable thing that is supposed to be really helpful and is supposed to help you plan long term
Yeah.
becomes afraid that this will be like weaponized against them. So I'm always like curious,
Yeah, that's
you
true,
know,
huh? I'm curious to know like how when you work with and crossing the bridge of the new generation, and it's so fascinating just to see. I think we can look at it as observers, even though we're part of these generational gaps and like the changes, right? Like, oh, you're an old millennial, you're a young millennial, or you're a Gen Z. I don't know,
Yeah.
but all I know is that it's happening, it's here, but we are all human and we all want to do one thing, which is do our best, hopefully. That's an interesting thought because I think that only arises if the culture is toxic and you know
Mm-hmm.
that the leaders will use it in a negative way. But usually you know that before you get involved.
For
Like
sure.
if it's easier said than done, like personal experience too. If the culture is toxic, like you will save a lot more heartache, headache, and mental, not just sanity, but like mental well-being leaving early, even though you're giving up like some sort of revenue or money. So there's that opportunity cost. But you also know, depending on the leaders, do they talk about people behind their back? Do
Mm.
they, because if they do, then they know they're going to talk about you. So you already
Mm.
know, depending on that culture that's trying to institute this to be more oppressive. I wouldn't say oppressive is the word, but more of
It's more
trying.
cautious.
Yeah, no, it's a weird thing. People do weird things, but and then it's not in alignment with the mission. It's just like people do weird things, even with small businesses.
Yep.
But I've never, if you're running, if the team has a good guideline in terms of our core values. If you're in alignment with the core values and they're not just plastered on the wall, they're actually being implemented day in and day out. There's a mission that's pretty cool that you're in alignment with. Hey, we're going to conquer this
Mm-hmm.
territory, or we're going to go build this thing, or we're going to shoot it to the moon, or we're going to go to Mars, or whatever. If you're in alignment with that mission and the values are cool and the people you work for actually live out those values, they're not just here on a podcast, we're live, we're on Zoom, and here we talk about the cool talk, but we close the recording and then we actually say what we really mean. If that's what's happening in your culture, then definitely it's a level of suspect. But if it's transparent throughout on online and offline, then implementing that kind of idea of measuring team happiness doesn't sound to be like a red flag to me, because if they're actually
Yeah.
measuring it, that means that they care about it. And if they care about it, that means that they want to do something about it.
Yeah. And to your point, and I don't think that those questions, in my experience, those specific types of questions of retaliation don't come up in places where people do feel psychological safety. So if that is a question that's coming up for you in your business as you're doing change management, I would definitely, that's a really good opportunity to just take a moment and step back and say, hey, why would my team feel that? And to your point, especially when it comes to change management, just making it okay to fail, and
Mhm.
understanding that like adoption isn't going to be 100% out the gate, and that
Oh,
there's
yeah.
going to be other feedback, and that it's iterative. It has to be iterative processes, or as your business needs change, as your team changes, as like all of these, as new tools get implemented, your internal operations has to be iterative. It
Mhm.
eventually, if you're not taking that approach of just like ideally real time like updates and changes, what you're going to find yourself is that you have a business that is supposed to support 20, 50 team members with processes that were made for 5 or 10, and you'll find other many pain points based off of that.
Makes a lot of sense. I think the key thing around that too is what you mentioned earlier, and I want to dive into it, is how do you manage this with the growing trend of different personality needs based on a generational, I hate to call them like, what are they? I don't know if it's a stigma or if it's like pre-assumptions, like, oh, I pre-assume this kind of generation is going to behave this way, so I have to say these kinds of things. And I'm seeing that with different teams as more people are graduating from college and then starting entry level roles or becoming leaders in their organization, et cetera, et cetera. How do you manage that with a level of empathy with your clients and the teams? And what's like your words of wisdom to guide founders through this?
Yeah, I would say I don't worry as much about, I wouldn't worry as much about generational changes. And the reason is this: whether it be age or background or like language or culture or religion, it like there are so many different people coming together with so many different perspectives, and just even if we all grew up in the same household, completely different ways of working. If you have siblings, you know that sometimes you're like, did we were we raised by the same people? Because I'm not sure. But people, and so you're just going to have different people coming in. All of that to say is that people have different ways of working, and the way that I the way that I have navigated it is a level of negotiation. So I'll get the information, I'll put together a larger framework of what I think, but then I will this is where democracy takes place.
Hmm.
What is the hierarchy of the information in a file storage system and how we'd like to find it? You vote based off of like, how does the team at large, and obviously it's not going to capture everybody, but how does the team at large to look for information? We vote on it, majority wins. But that's not to say, so that means that then there might be other folks who maybe didn't fit into that bulk, at which point there's a couple of opportunities to either build in a couple workarounds for different types. And for me, what that will look like is making the same information accessible in different ways. And or it could be giving extra support during change management, just knowing that it's going to take them a little bit longer. So there's ways that you can structurally, it'll be like, okay, so in that specific example, it's okay, we're losing a lot of legacy data because information is being stored in private drives.
Oh
We
yeah,
need to
that's a huge
get,
issue. Yeah.
yeah, especially in agency world where you're just like, where is that creative file? It's gone. It's in the ethos. No one knows.
Yeah, it's
We don't
all
have
it's
the
horrible.
original file anymore. Yeah. And it's a big issue. So like, how do you get people to like, okay, once you're done with the thing, or once you're done with this iteration of the thing, you gotta save it in the right place. It's painful. It's painful for people because you're like, I did it. I want to save it. I want to go on to the next thing. I don't want to then have to worry about moving this file. So, like best practices that helped inform like the larger kind of like structure, but then there were parts inside of it specifically where I would just talk to people and I would just be like, "Hey, does this information belong in like your folder? Okay, now let's find the right owner of this data and who owns it, and then creating like an ARPA chart so that we can figure out like this massive thing and we don't have a dedicated like file manager. How do we distribute this?" And it sounds really simple of implementing a new drive, but it
It increases the
actually
speed of the velocity of execution.
for
Because
sure.
it's interesting because in the remote work, the key things are information, action, and communication. And I can't tell you how many times I've said it this year, like it's 2023 and I should not be requesting to get access to this document, but I still am. And here it is. It's 2023. No, but
It'll be happening for a while, probably,
oh gosh,
unfortunately.
no. RIP. Anyways, it's fascinating because what you're mentioning is one thing that I thought was pretty interesting there was what's your take on in a business context, the word is a negative word, it's connotation of a word. But you mentioned democracy, but also sometimes when you're working with founders, it's an authoritative, not authoritarian, because authoritarian is a huge
Mhm.
connotation negative, but authoritative, where it's usually a founder or two co-founders making the final say versus what do we all vote for? How have you balanced both working with different personalities and just what's your take on that?
Yeah. So to your point, if you have a leader that's decided to invest in, hey, this is a frustration, this is a pain point that my team is feeling, like we're not working as well as possible. I haven't had much pushback because like I said, the big structure that goes to the leadership first. What are we doing? Here's like the big structure of what we're doing. This is how it's all supposed to work. Here's this map and this whole thing, how this ecosystem works. Once we get signed off on there, founders and CEOs, they don't really want to be in the gritty details. They don't care
Hmm.
at what level that why, because they're most likely not the ones who are looking for that information, but what they do want to make sure is that the team isn't wasting more time redoing efforts just because a file couldn't be found, or spending extra time looking for a document because it's in the wrong place, or we're sending the wrong version to the customer because no one really knows what final is. Those are the things that like founders are most concerned with. So I'm usually always only working with the manager, the leadership, whatever that is, when it comes to the strategic and the kind of architectural element of what tools are we using and things like that. Do we need to procure something? Like those big solutions, those always come from the final decision comes from the founder. Now, I might do research beforehand, especially before I present solutions to the founder, saying, "Hey, I spoke to the team. Here's what they're looking. Here's how your team works, and here's some solutions that I think would be most beneficial." And for the most part,
Like
if
that.
there Yeah, if there's like budgetary constrictions, I usually know that beforehand. And then what that means for me is it's an extra challenge. How do I find
Hmm.
solutions using the tools that we already have?
Tailored solutions, but then you're down the hierarchy is the majority vote so that
Mhm.
you can understand what's the consensus, where are we aligning towards, bringing that back to leadership, and then from there making the final call depending on what we should do, what should not do. That's pretty cool in the way that you're able to facilitate that. Cool. Well, I got one question left before we do the question where people can find you, but I'm curious, what is the one thing that you see be screwed up the most right now that are errors that teams are running into or that teams are facing that's unique and different? And the flip side of that question is what's the one thing teams doing really well that surprised you?
All right. The one thing that I see teams doing really poor, um, it is data management. It really is.
Yeah.
No surprise there. And it's not necessarily just in drives, but even, man, actually, I'm going to change that because this one's even bigger and this one's even bigger and
Okay.
more impactful because most companies pay for a project management system.
Oh
Almost
yeah.
none of them are using them effectively.
True. 100%.
So a project management system, it's just a tool. It's a tool no matter which one you use, right? It's you have to configure it to what your processes are. What it can't do is put the updates in there for you. Some of that information can be automated, but in order for it to be a resource where people can trust what's happening, updates have to go into a centralized location. A lot of
Mhm.
times we'll see updates on Slack and then also email and then also deliverables. Maybe this one file is referenced in one place, but it's not the final file, and the final file is being referenced somewhere else. So
In
if
the
you're
final file.
yes.
All right.
But if you're able to maintain that thread in a centralized task, it makes a world of difference to be able to understand what is going on, what happened. And you, as a leader who you're not looking that granularly at it, but maybe something, maybe an issue arised or something, a client may be upset. Without that kind of centralization of the status of what has been happening for the life cycle of this project, it gets really hard to really understand what the issue is and how to fix it.
Yeah, I have to mirror and mention those two things too. Data, not just like in documents, but even like marketing data, website data, analytical data. Like where are we storing customer information? Where are we storing
Mhm.
our own growth information? How are we translating that into actionable pieces? And I find that to be sometimes you're piecemealing, sometimes data is inaccurate, sometimes there's
Yeah.
discrepancies. And how do you make sense to what is truth? And how do you make strategic decisions off of that centralized, acknowledged consensus that this is the true data? And you're completely right. I think velocity, specifically for small teams, comes back to how quickly can we do the right things, but also execute on those things. Because if you're taking action on the right ideas, but it takes you forever to take action on the right ideas, it's a slow death. And that's very
For
difficult,
sure.
specifically for startups or small teams. But again, it's not all about speed, but it is about taking the right actions and being proactive towards it. So I have to mirror those. What's the one thing that teams are surprising you with? It's like, hey, this is pretty cool. It's interesting. I haven't seen other people do that.
I love seeing the way, especially most of the teams I've been collaborating with are all remote. And I just love seeing the way that people are collaborating. Like it's especially not that long ago, for a lot of people, it felt pretty crazy, especially I did spend some years working at creative agencies.
Mm.
And it felt pretty crazy to collaborate and to do big thinking and to create resonating campaigns and to do all that big work digitally. But it is beautiful to see the way that folks are literally end-to-end projects completely online and using different tools like Miro to brainstorm, which is actually like even more effective in some ways. And yeah, I think there's a level of visibility that is accessible through having things done digitally. And I think folks have just gotten really creative to the point where it just feels, for a lot of teams, it feels really native and really natural.
Yeah, it's cool to see how we're going to be fostering and building relationship digitally. I know some teams have difficulty with that, but others are using really interesting like
Yeah.
video conferencing tools outside of what we're doing right now, like work zones or like open office hours, like just show up and just work together, even though it's no
Yeah.
one's talking to each other. There's all these little cool things that try to build in-person relationships, and you can still build a strong bond. And I'm constantly going to be fascinated with that, especially when we have the goggles and we're going to work in our goggle office with VR.
I think the important thing when thinking about that is we have to accept a new paradigm. I think if we
Mm,
always compare it to whatever feeling of knowing your desk mates like kids soccer game schedule and stuff like that, maybe there won't be that level of granularity, but I will say for me my favorite thing about pandemic was these little windows, just like seeing your background, right? And you get to see mine. And for the first time, it just felt so personal. It feels like you're literally in someone's home. And in some ways, and that kind of privacy that you can get, like amongst team members, is also really beautiful and also builds a level of vulnerability and trust in a different way. So I think if we are open to the new paradigms of a virtual world, I think we'll be really excited of all the things that we make happen.
I love that. That's a high note to end on. Gazelle, what's the best place for people to learn more about what you're up to and to thank you for being on today?
Yeah, you can follow me on LinkedIn at Gisell Paula, or you can, if you like Instagram, I'm on there at Get Scrategy.
Sweet. We'll put those links in the show notes. Giselle, thanks for being on.
Thanks for having me, Raul.
If you found value in today's podcast, please consider sharing this with someone that you believe could also benefit from this episode. You never know, you may be the catalyst that opens them up to a new way of operating their business and experiencing life. As always, it's an honor to be a small part of your journey. This is Raul Hernandez. Do good work.